Oh, sure.
Rules Committee come to order, and thank you very much for joining us this evening. Before we get to our work for the evening, I'd like to take a moment to celebrate the life of ranking member of the committee, my dear friend Louise Slaughter, who last week passed away. As you all know, Louise passed away on Friday evening. She leaves behind a legacy of service and deep love of country that I think each of us seek to emulate. Each of us, as we do our duty not only to our district, but the duty to this body and the duty to the Constitution, come to this body and do, I think, amazing things. Louise was one of those. She fiercely led. She did it with loyalty to her constituents from Rochester, New York, and she brought her ideas to Washington, D.C. to make sure that they were represented. Louise made history. And I would refer you to the back wall at this point where we're honoring Louise, not only to cherish her memory, but to cherish her life. She broke down barriers by serving as the first female chairwoman of the House Rules Committee. As her portrait was hung in the room, I was there to relish the moment not only with her family, but constituents, staff, and many others who saw her legacy and her life as being important to all Americans, not just those from Rochester. She believed that anything was possible, and she could fight for it. She always spoke fondly and passionately to young Americans, many times as they were in this room, but also other times as I saw her throughout the Capitol. No doubt her influence has been counted on to help others in their life, not only with respect and dignity, but a spirit that really was pretty interesting. I cherished her friendship, and I'll miss her. Her camaraderie was second to none. And of course, her famous rhubarb pie was enjoyed by all. She was a friend to every member of this committee. She treated all witnesses with respect. She was important not just to this committee, but also her staff on both sides of the aisle. We're going to miss her. I'm going to miss her. Not only her wit, her fire, her leadership, and I think most importantly, the kindness and cordiality that she brought to everybody she came into contact with. I've had the immense privilege of working side by side with her for 20 years. And I considered her a partner, and we worked together. She's a dear friend, and I'm going to miss her, but we're also going to celebrate her on a regular basis. I intend to speak about her, just as we talked about Bob, as she spoke about Bob. She remembered her husband well. He left a mark on her and a mark on us. She did too. I don't act like I was on her team. I act like that we worked together. She was fierce. She was a fierce competitor. I admired that. Her service on behalf of the entire Rules Committee was of service to this Congress. It was of service to her party and of service to our nation. I will continue to offer my prayers and sympathy for her family, for the staff, for this body. Don't have to make it up when it fits. Everybody recognized it. They knew it for what it was when she came to work, what she stood for, how she lived her life, and the kind of person she is and was. We're going to speak at some point about the opportunity to join her in a service that I believe will be this Friday. It's not been completely finalized. But whenever it is, I will be there. I'd like to yield now to the gentleman, the ranking member for any opening comment he'd like to make, and I thank the gentleman for his insistence that we remembered Louise openly throughout this time and speak about her with praise and celebration of her life. And I appreciate him and other members of this committee as they express ideas about her, and I want to thank you. Gentleman's recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your very kind and generous words about our colleague Louise. And I think I speak for everybody on this panel when I say we're going to miss her. She was an incredible woman. She had a heart bigger than Kentucky and New York combined, but she also had a spine of steel. She cared deeply about things, and she fought hard for things. She never gave up on anything or anyone she believed in. And I think we all appreciated her candor, her collegiality, and her compassion. With Louise, you never had to wonder where you stood on an issue. If she was with you, you felt the love. If she was against you, you had to back away because she fought hard for what she believed in. And that really kind of is a great part of her legacy. I think her constituents and all the causes that she championed benefited from her persistence. And I said last week, I said, the world is going to miss Louise. I already do. Mr. Chairman, one of the great things Louise did is she assembled, I think, some of the finest staff anywhere on Capitol Hill. They together wrote a statement on behalf of all of them that I would like to read with your permission.
Yes, sir.
And this is a statement of the Democratic staff on the House Rules Committee regarding the loss of Ranking Member Louise McIntosh Slaughter. Louise was our boss, mentor, leader, and our chairwoman and our friend. She taught us when to ask, when to push, and when to fight like hell. In her case, she usually preferred to fight like hell. But while doing so, she was always armed with her unmatched Southern charm. It was her charm and intellect that allowed her to teach us that language is a form of art. And while the right words are required at all times, the perfect words are what make life more interesting. Of their importance, she would often say, and I quote, "Scholars and historians will read these words someday. It has to be right," end quote. But Louise never used words to simply convey the facts. She painted the most animated picture with her language, using phrases that almost shook the listener. For example, to express that the rules in the Senate are arcane and confusing, Louise said, "You would think that the Red Queen from Alice in Wonderland wrote the rules over there." She once said getting anything done in Congress was as hard as docking the Queen Mary by hand. And rather than say, "I don't fully understand this issue," she would much prefer, I know more about turning rocks into gold than I do about this. We're going to have to dig in deeper here." Louise also taught us that time is precious. She acted with urgency, knowing she would not be here forever, while somehow at the same time living like her life would never end. There was one certainty: as long as that woman could breathe and move, she would work. She worked through illness, diabetes, a broken leg, the loss of her husband of 57 years, and probably countless ailments that she powered through in private. She refused wheelchairs and canes to show no hints of weakness, a condition Louise McIntosh Slaughter of Harlan County, Kentucky, never knew. A lot has been said this week about her legislative accomplishments, which are too many to count. But what we will miss most is her charm, her sense of humor, and the way she brought limitless passion and love to this job and to our lives. Some of us on the staff started working here just a few weeks ago, and in that short time, we could already see what a force of nature she was. Some of us spent countless hours by her side during votes and committee meetings, often very late at night, struggling while she looked wide awake at 3 a.m., powered only by the virtue of her beliefs and a cup of black coffee. And a few among us have known Louise for most of our adult lives, growing up from junior staff to become her most senior advisors. We learned so much from our boss and appreciated it every time she pretended to learn from us. You know, working in this building for this woman has been the privilege and honor of a lifetime. We are deeply grateful for the kind words from all over the country and from members of this committee in particular. We appreciate the kindness that the chairman always showed Louise, and she did too. And we are also so thankful to our remaining members for stepping up to fill the void and for their comforting words and actions, reminding us what wonderful people we work with. But make no mistake, the loss for our committee, for this House, and for our country is profound. While this tragedy is a deep wound for all of us and shocking in its suddenness, we will follow Louise's example and carry on with our work, no matter how hard it is. And I want to thank the staff for putting this together, and I know Louise is watching from above and very proud of each and every one of them. So I thank the chairman. I yield back.
Mr. McGovern, thank you very much. The call that I received from the staff director, Mr. Session, the other night, the other morning, was one of pain, but I know it was more on Don and the staff than anyone. And as we would watch Louise come and go, I was always, perhaps some of the best moments might be up here when we did do our job, but they were also downstairs when I would visit her. And she was always warm and genuine and in her own court, so to speak, with confidence, with enthusiasm, and always with ideas. And there wasn't one time when I would not present her with one thing that she would say, okay, and let's remember this other thing. And Don, I want to say that her confidence and love of you was deep and profound. And those other young people who are in this staff, don't forget how important words are, missions are, and life is. You will move throughout your life, but this will be a void. And I so much appreciate the way your staff has handled her also, because to the very end, she was important to you. And that tells me a lot about you, too. So, Don, thank you for accepting my words of support also. And as we move forward this week, next week, whatever it might be, we're here to make sure that we are part of trying to do this right. So, thank you very much. Judge Hastings, do you wish time?
Very briefly, Mr. Chairman. I had the good fortune of knowing Louise and Robert for all of my career here, and had the good fortune to travel with them abroad often. She encouraged me to become a member of the Helsinki Commission. She was there before me, and she side by side assisted me in becoming president of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Organization for Security in Europe. Mr. Chairman, like all of us, I was overcome with sadness by the tragic news of the passing of our dear friend and esteemed colleague, who was not only the ranking member of this committee, but first and only woman to have chaired the committee. For 30 years, Louise poured every ounce of energy she had into serving her constituents in upstate New York. She never hesitated, as Jim has said, to speak her mind, and she never wavered in espousing her beliefs. I'll always be very grateful for the time that I had to serve alongside her. Last week, none of us would have expected the suddenness of this tragedy. But we were here, and I wasn't feeling well, and it's so ironic how life has its twists and turns. And the last thing that she said to me was, "Elsie, take care of yourself." Mm-hmm. I promised her that I will do that. Louise was one of my greatest friends in Congress, having not only served, as I've indicated here, on this committee with her for all the years that I've been on the committee, but also throughout the Congress's activities. I told a lady yesterday who didn't know Louise about the extraordinary work that she did, and she was a microbiologist, and my college graduate was in biology, and she and I talked about a number of things. But one of the things I hope that we continue was her effort to make sure that we dealt with foodborne illnesses in this country. She was a champion, as all of us on this committee know, in that regard. Her legacy speaks for itself. She was not just a champion for women's rights. She was a champion of working families everywhere. And this nation has lost one of our fiercest public servants, and her absence is going to leave an unavoidable void. I particularly am appreciative of the staff comments, which capture a lot of her essence. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to offer my deepest condolences to Louise's daughters, Megan Secator, Amy Slaughter, and Emily Minerva, her 7 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandson, as well as to her friends, constituents, and congressional staff during this extremely difficult time. Louise's spirit and loving memory will always live in the halls of Congress. She will be dearly missed. We should be comforted by the fact that she joins her beloved Robert Slaughter, and that's how she would refer to him often. All of us are saddened, and just as a point of levity, which Louise would expect from me, we could really do her proud on this committee by making our weak rules be ones with open rules. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Judge Hastings, thank you very much. It would be her wish, I'm sure.
Yeah.
The gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you. You know, Louise has been a great mentor to me since I came to Congress almost 10 years ago. And, you know, I always just, I can't even imagine a Congress without Louise. She was here long before me, and this is my final year. I thought she'd be here long after me. So this just comes as a great surprise. You know, when I first showed up and we were in the majority, I sat where Ms. Cheney is now, and Louise really taught me the ropes of the Rules Committee, everything from, at that point in the majority, never voting against a rule, to being able to handle myself on the floor. And her amazing, insightful wit, her character, are really just a credit to this committee and this institution. I particularly want to highlight that she also was somebody that was ahead of her time in many ways. She was a firm believer in science. She was one of only 67 members in 1996 to vote against the Defense of Marriage Act. She always stood for LGBT equality. And for, you know, a woman who grew up in Kentucky of that era, that was amazingly forward-looking. And in many ways, I give her even more credit for her progressive, forward-looking views than if she'd grown up in San Francisco or in New York. As you know, she studied microbiology. She went on to have a career at Procter & Gamble. And she got involved in the community, like so many of us before we decided to run for office. People just started suggesting it to her at a time when not a lot of women were in this institution. And she overcame the odds and was elected, and not only that, rose to the height of being the first woman ever to chair the powerful Rules Committee. So I, throughout my life, it'll be a great honor to have called her a mentor, a friend, a source of inspiration. And I look forward to honoring her memory and Bob's memory, who, as we all know, used to attend our committee meetings, especially late at night when we were here, 10, 11 o'clock. I would also add at those meetings, 10, 11 o'clock. We had some at 12:30, 1 o'clock. I was always tired, you know, somewhat disheveled, but somehow Louise looked as bright as the morning dew and ready to go, even if we were here at 1 in the morning. I never quite figured out her secret, but her stamina is truly legend, and I, for one, have benefited tremendously from having known the amazing Louise McIntosh Slaughter, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. You know, gifts, she made friends with things that were hard. She had gifts. I mean, God gave her so many gifts, not just the ability to get up and do things at 3 in the morning, but I don't know that she's ever said a nasty or negative thing about even hard things. I think she took them on. And these were some of the gifts you all are in reference to. The gentlewoman from Wyoming.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I knew Louise for the shortest period of time, probably of just about everybody in this room. And I am tremendously, I feel tremendously blessed even to have known her for that short period of time and to have had the chance to watch her up close and to have had the chance to learn from her. As you all know better than I do, there were many, many times sitting here when Louise would start to say something and you would think, you know, this is going to be a softball, and then all of a sudden, you know, would come the toughest question, the biggest zinger, and she always did it. It was that combination that Jim mentioned of tremendous intellect, tremendous competence, diligence. She knew the issues, and charm. And it was incredibly effective, and she just kept fighting. And I was just feel very blessed that I've had the opportunity to watch her firsthand. In particular, as a woman, it was nice to have another woman up here on the panel. And she's somebody that provided lessons for all of us, so men and women alike, in terms of how to conduct yourself and how to have disagreements, policy disagreements, in a way that remains civil. And I always appreciated that, and I'll always remember and feel very grateful that I had the opportunity to serve with her. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. The gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly, I wanted to say that Louise Slaughter taught me how to be a member of Congress. She had such grace and compassion. If you saw how she interacted with other members, if you saw how she interacted with constituents and staff, she was just a great role model for newer members to Congress. And I just really, when you called me the other day, really saddened that members who will be joining this body in the future won't have a role model like that to see and to follow. So I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman from the state of Washington.
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a sad honor to join my colleagues in talking about our friend Louise. You know, a lot of the things we talk about in this room are become kind of heated, and certainly we disagree on a lot of different points, and no one that I know in here is shy about expressing their feelings on things, and certainly Louise was not. But she also demonstrated that personal relationships can transcend political relationships. I counted her truly as a friend, and from day one, she reached out to me to extend her hand of friendship, and I really appreciated that. Invited me into her office and told me some about the history of all the things that had happened in there over the centuries. And not that she was there to know that for sure, but she had knowledge of what was going on and had happened way back to when the British burned the Capitol, and it was really interesting. But probably the biggest thing that she and I connected on, and I hope none of you ever have to experience this, but she and I were members of an exclusive club. We had both lost our spouses, and she took it upon herself to in every opportunity, make sure I was doing okay. And we exchanged books, somehow she had me thinking I was helping her through the loss of her husband, when in fact, being much smarter than I was, kind of had a reverse effect. And through my attempt to help her, I was really helping myself. And I just always appreciated her reaching out, and her kind of taking me under, so to speak, her wing, even though I was of the wrong party. And I too very saddened to get your phone call last week, and it doesn't seem as though it's even possible that there's just a bouquet of flowers in front of her chair. So thanks for giving us the opportunity to express ourselves.
Thank the gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I got your call and I was driving, and I was just thinking for a moment, it reminded me of this committee in particular, and the hours that we keep and the things that we do and back and forth, but it also reminded me that each and every one of us, behind whatever party affiliation we have or wherever we represent, there's a reminder of our humanity. There's a reminder that there's a bigger place than even this place that we all value so much. I remember Louise just in being here on this committee and watching her, and she always just had a way of, no matter what you were thinking, if you walked in, I remember she'd be here sometimes early, and I'd walk in, and she would look over at me, she had that big grin, and she'd just wave at me, just completely disarmed at that point. And I'll never forget the last time I had the privilege of standing across on the floor of the House debating a rule with her. I walked over, and we were both sort of tired. It was time to get out. I went over and asked her. I come up on her, and she didn't see me come up, so I laid my hand on the back of her shoulder, and I said, "How many speakers are you going to have today?" She said, "I don't know, but I'm cold. I want to get out of here." She just had a way of doing the job, but also knowing at the same time about people around her. When I told my wife, we both remembered in her kindness that she had. It's often been said, and there's a proverb that says that all of us, it's a Chinese proverb, says we're all like chalk, that everywhere we go, we leave a mark. And for this boy from Georgia, the young lady from Kentucky left a mark. And that is something I will carry with me. With that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman from Louisville, Texas, Dr. Michael Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank Mr. McGovern for sharing the thoughts of your staff, Democratic staff. I know Louise was one who was revered and revered the staff, and I think that was important to have that sentiment expressed today. We're all feeling their pain as well. So thank you, and thanks to the Democratic staff for putting pen to ink and making those thoughts available to the rest of the world. I think that was important that those things were said. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you very much, Dr. Burgess. The gentleman from Georgia.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I didn't return your call on Saturday. I got your message, and by the time I got it, I knew why you were calling. And there's something that makes it a little more official when somebody picks up the phone and tells you. I didn't want to hear it. I heard from my mom a short time later. You all don't know my mother, but she's not from Harlan County, Kentucky, but she has the same spirit that Louise has. She'll tell you exactly how it is, and I'll just tell you, gentlemen, she does not always have kind words to say about you all when we're on the House floor together. But she knew how I felt about Louise, and she heard and sent me a note saying she was feeling all of our pain. Made it real. I like telling Louise's story because it makes me feel good that us Southerners so talented that those New Yorkers need somebody like that to represent them here in Congress. I've always believed that was a powerful testimony, but the truth is, first thing she said to me when I joined in that big class of 4 freshmen in 2011 was, "Rob, it's not too late to get out while you can." I bring all the young children, the daughters and the granddaughters who come to visit my office, and I have them sit in Louise's chair and look up there at the wall at the first woman to ever chair the Rules Committee and talk about how an indomitable spirit can lead to absolutely anything at all. I'm not sad to see Louise and Bob together again. The truth is, time plays tricks on you, and I still think about Bob sitting back there on the back row and them sharing that late night smile. But I am sorry that we're not going to have that force in our lives, and that we're not going to have that model for the young women in our lives. And the truth is, we're not going to have that model for the old men like me and you, Mr. Chairman, in our lives. And we all know that she made us better. She promised she was going to bring the Hickey Freeman folks down one last time to have a suit fitting for us all. I wore my absolute rattiest suit that I have today. My staff pointed it out earlier. She would find me when I was looking good, and she would find me when I was looking not so good. And she said, "Rob, you know that in New York we have an American-made suit that even on your worst day will make you feel better." I'm going to find that Hickey Freeman company. I'm going to buy my Louise Slaughter suit, and I'm not just going to have that picture on the wall to remind me. I'm going to feel good about myself when I put it on, and I'm going to feel good about myself the way I did when she'd seek me out and try to lift me up instead of tear me down. And I'm grateful to her for that. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I'd like for us to take a minute, offer our own suggestion as you would choose. I'm going to offer a quick prayer to myself, and I'll let you do that to yourself. Thank you. Thank you. My prayer was for, in particular, the young people that are here, that they will remember and see the strength and courage, grace and charm, spit and fire, but never to give and never yield. And I hope that that's something that each of you will carry on for some period of time. Without objection, I'd like to add, if I can, to the record, New York Times article, as well as my press release about what Louise meant to me. We'll enter that into the record if anybody else has anything else during the day. I encourage us to leave it for our awesome stenographer. Today, we will be considering H.R. 4566, the Alleviation Stress Test Burdens to Help Investors Act, and H.R. 5247, the Right to Try Act of 2018. The U.S. Treasury Department supports legislative action to eliminate Dodd-Frank's stress testing requirement for investment advisors and investment companies. In the SEC, the primary regulator of this industry, has questioned the applicability of bank-centric stress tests to non-banks, given the dramatically and drastic differences from business structures as they exist. H.R. 4566 amends Title I of the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act to exempt non-bank financial institutions not under the supervision by the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System from the Dodd-Frank Act's stress testing requirements. This legislation recognizes the vast difference between investment companies and mutual funds from banks. The second bill under consideration, H.R. 5247, authorizes the use of eligible and ingestible drugs by patients who have been diagnosed with certain illnesses. Exhausted approval treatment options that are not available to participants in a clinical trial. Sadly, some patients do not have access to investigatable drugs even after exhausting other types of treatments, meaning that you may be at the final stages of your life and there might be something that's under investigation now, a drug, and we believe that this will allow a person another chance properly to use those drugs that have been at least through a phase 1 trial. Federal law will increase access nationwide to unapproved drugs for patients with terminal illnesses, providing another chance for those patients who have exhausted all other options. I support this, and I believe in it. So without objection, I'd like to welcome, obviously, the gentleman from Maine, the gentleman, Mr. Poliquin, and the gentlewoman from California, Ranking Member, Ms. Waters, and thank you, Maxine, for coming again today. I know this will allow you a chance to express yourself as you choose about Louise, your dear friend and the person you could count on always in this committee. And I want to welcome them this first panel. Also, if you have anything in writing without objection, we'll enter that into the record for awesome stenographer to complete the record properly. And I would defer to the gentleman if he would choose to comment on the piece of legislation the gentleman's recognized.
I just want to welcome our witnesses, and I will forego a comment, so I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman does not seek time. Okay, here we go. Mr. Poliquin, welcome. Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. And I very much appreciate everybody on this committee for putting a human face on Congress. It doesn't happen enough. And I appreciate everyone doing that. And I hope that Ms. Slaughter's kids and grandkids were listening, because it's a tremendous testament to who she is and from people who have worked with her for a very long time and know her well in a professional setting. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for giving everyone an opportunity to put a human face,
yes, sir,
on Congress. Mr. Chairman, my bill 4566, Alleviating Stress Test Burdens to Help Investors Act, is a very, very strong bipartisan piece of legislation. It passed the House Financial Services Committee with a vote of 47-8. And it is a very common sense bill, Mr. Chairman, in that it makes a very clear and common sense distinction between a bank and the financial model that a bank follows and a non-bank financial institution like a mutual fund. In particular, sir, when banks operate, they take in deposits, and these become liabilities to the institution, which they must return with interest if that's part of the agreement. Whereas if you're a pension fund manager or a mutual fund, you act as an agent. These assets are not on your balance sheet. You act as an agent. And nobody expects, of course, when you invest money in a mutual fund, that it'll go up or down. You hope it'll go up, and it might go down. But if there is a problem with a mutual fund company or pension fund manager, it represents no systemic risk to the economy. And as a result, the regulations that oversee banks should be very different from those that oversee non-banks that don't have the same business model. And what my bill does, simply, Mr. Chairman, it says that if you are a non-bank financial institution, like a mutual fund company, and FSOC has already designated you as a SIFI, and part of that is, of course, the stress testing that comes with it, they can continue to do that. But if you have not yet been so designated, then you can become exempt from these stress test requirements. And the reason why this is so important is because as regulations increase, in this case, unnecessary regulations on non-bank financial institutions, it means the costs go up, and the costs are borne by the investors who are trying to save for college or retirement or what have you. And that means your rate of return goes down, your nest egg gets smaller. So it's really important to make sure we understand here in this country, in this body, that one size does not fit all when it comes to banks or non-bank financial institutions. So I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for letting me to speak on behalf of this bill. It's a good bill. It's a bipartisan bill. And I certainly hope and pray that we move forward with this. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Poliquin, thank you very much. The gentlewoman from Los Angeles is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I thank you for inviting me to testify today. But before I discuss the bill we're considering today, I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about my dear friend and colleague, Congresswoman Louise Slaughter. I'm devastated, and I guess we're all devastated. to hear of Congresswoman Slaughter's passing. You know, I had the privilege of working closely with her for nearly 30 years here in Congress, and she was indeed a phenomenal woman of impeccable integrity who always fought for her constituents and for working families across this country. I mourn her passing and extend my deepest sympathies to her family, all of her friends, staff, and constituents. And through our deep sadness, we must also celebrate her life and legacy as an outstanding woman and leader. Louise made history as the first woman to serve as chair of this very committee, the Powerful Rules Committee. She also is credited with establishing the Office of Research on Women's Health in the National Institutes of Health, which provides critical funding for the fight against breast cancer. She also co-authored the Violence Against Women Act, another example of remarkable leadership and advocacy for the forgotten and for women. Her outstanding legislative achievements blazed a path for women in this country. Congresswoman Slaughter will be sorely missed, and of course I extend my deepest condolences to her family and loved ones. Mr. Chairman, while it does not seem fitting to address regular business at this time, I guess we're going to have to do that. But let me just say I've been listening to comments about Louise, and for me, what Louise said to me on the floor after I've been in one of these committees with you was very instructive. I think she always felt like she needed to console me because I'd come time and time again, and I'd lose every time. And so when she would get on the floor, she would say, well, they just don't understand. Can you believe that they did it? That they did that? And she really understood financial services issues, and she would always remind me of what we had been through. And she said, "Well, I just don't think they remember what we went through in 2008." So I'm going to miss her sagent advice, and I'm going to miss her attempts to console me about my losses in this committee consistently and constantly. And with that, I'm going to do whatever is necessary to arrange schedule to be at her services. I, too, am anxiously waiting for what arrangements are being made. And I think probably I'm feeling so devastated because I don't know if she really knew how much she was respected and how much she was appreciated. And of course, if she passed without really knowing what I and others felt about her, that's something that will linger with me for a long time. So I'm just very devastated, and I will go on with the presentation that we have to do today, but I really don't feel up to it. I guess we have to continue with our work. And so this is H.R. 4566, and you've heard from Mr. Palgren on this bill. And I hope that I can improve this bill by my amendment, which I submitted to the Rules Committee. Mr. Chairman, H.R. 4566, as currently drafted, would eliminate a tool designed to identify problems within large financial institutions before they lead to an economic crisis. Last Wednesday marked 10 years since global investment bank Bear Stearns imploded as a result of its failure to manage risk associated with its highly leveraged balance sheet and exposure to the subprime mortgage market. American taxpayers were forced to come to the rescue to prevent the firm's collapse from spreading to other over-leveraged Wall Street institutions. The demise of Bear Stearns was the canary in the coal mine for the ensuing financial crisis which ravaged the United States economy, destroyed trillions of dollars of wealth, and put millions of Americans out of their jobs and their homes. Dodd-Frank, among other reforms, required rigorous stress tests of the nation's largest financial institutions. The Dodd-Frank Act also gave the Federal Reserve Board to monitor the financial system to detect risk before they pose an existential threat to our economy. If regular stress testing had been conducted on firms like Bear Stearns from 2006 through 2008, it might have revealed major threats to the economy sooner. giving both the company and federal financial regulators a better chance to take remedial action to avoid a catastrophic near collapse of the global financial system. So H.R. 4566 would eliminate the Federal Reserve's authority to stress test non-bank financial companies in situations where the firm's designation as systemically important is pending before the Financial Stability Oversight Council, that is FSOC. That is why I submitted an amendment that, if adopted, would restore the Fed's discretionary authority to stress test any non-bank, provided that the test meets certain conditions, including approval by a majority of FSOC members. It would also allow the Fed to use alternatives to capital as appropriate when stress testing systemically important non-banks. Additionally, the bill would relax the Dodd-Frank mandate that large financial companies under the SEC's and CFTC's purview conduct internal stress tests to determine the company's ability to withstand a recession. Although my amendment does not mandate this authority, it does broaden the authority of the regulators to stress test any financial institution they oversee, regardless of size. This amendment would ensure that financial institutions like investment companies that manage trillions of dollars of hardworking Americans' retirement savings, or broker-dealers like Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers can be appropriately evaluated for their ability to survive in a stressed economy before a crisis. So while I oppose H.R. 4566 in its current form, I would support an amended version of the bill that preserves the Fed's ability to identify and mitigate future systemic risk at non-banks before they lead to another crisis. If my amendment is adopted, I think H.R. 4566 would represent the kind of bipartisanship needed to build upon and strengthen Dodd-Frank. So I would welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. The question at hand, I believe, is about systemic risk and about the ability that we have to offer a reevaluation about oversight that is costly, is, I believe, unnecessary, and will, I think, allow, even though it's not been stated, any regulatory body to really aim at where the problem is, as opposed to the shuffling of paperwork and the representation. So I'm in support of this. The gentleman from Georgia.
Mr. Chairman, only because I know Ms. Waters is without her consoler-in-chief today, I would just ask, does the majority on the committee have a feeling about whether the amendment guts the bill or helps the bill?
I have a feeling, sir, that we're in support of it, the majority on the committee. Yes, sir.
Louise would be pleased. I yield back.
Yes, sir. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
No, I thank you both for being here. I obviously align myself with the remarks of Ms. Waters, and again, I hope her amendment is made in order and we can get a bill that she supports, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman from Georgia does not seek time. The gentleman from Florida.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pollican, if stress test regimes don't make sense for the asset management industry, what kind of regime should we apply to these non-banking firms?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Hastings. The Securities and Exchange Commission has been regulating the asset manager industry for about 80 years, and they're very well equipped to do that, sir, and they've done that very fruitfully over the past. The Federal Reserve really is not in the business of regulating asset managers. It should be the SEC. They're the primary regulator, sir.
Then, with the registered investment companies handling or holding almost $20 trillion in assets, representing the investments of more than 95 million individuals, how do we ensure that those investment firms have the ability to withstand financial stress?
Well, if I may, with all due respect, Mr. Hastings, if you and I are both in the asset management business and we both have companies, and my performance for my accounts is better than yours, I'm not saying that would be the case in all times, but just theoretically, let's say that happens, is that there's a high likelihood that your clients would come to my firm, but the assets themselves, sir, are held over here with Mr. Sessions' trust company. And so the assets are not physically housed at either asset management firm. They're over here in a trust company, which is, again, an agent for us, and we're agent for the clients. So there's no systemic risk coming from an asset manager that gets in trouble. That is very different from a bank that takes deposits. Those assets are a liability of that company, not an agent, but a liability of that organization. And if they get in trouble, they have a real, possibly systemic risk to the economy, depending on their size. That's not the case with an asset manager.
What's your take on that, Ms. Waters?
Well, let me just say that the asset managers are basically saying we self-stress test, and so we don't need the oversight. And I'm simply saying that the Fed should have the discretion to do that. It's as simple as that. Now, I know that Mr. Polgren is describing some scenario which they don't need this because they don't propose any risk. But I don't think that is true. I just think that they do propose a risk, and they do think that stress testing is needed. That's why they do so-called internal stress testing. And I'm just saying that the feds need to have the ability to do that. They should have the discretion to do it.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, if I may, Mr. Hastings, there's nothing in my bill or, to my understanding, Ms. Waters' amendment that prevents FSOC from requiring a stress test on a non-bank financial institution. There was nothing that precludes that action from being taken.
Yeah. Well, I find all of this interesting. It just seems to me that we're turning the clock back, and I don't understand the overall reasoning. Chairman, I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. The gentleman from Washington. The gentleman does not seek time. The gentleman from Colorado.
Yeah, Mr. Pollack, is this bill, any differences between this and the one that passed the House last session of Congress?
Say that one more time, sir, Mr. Paul.
Are there any differences between the bill here and the version that passed the House last session of Congress?
This is a new bill, and we could certainly get you the comparison, sir, about any specific differences, but the intent and the function is the same.
Okay, and Ms. Waters, do you have any opinion on any differences between the bill between this Congress and last Congress?
Well, I'm just reminded of my staff that the bill is not limited to asset managers. It would also remove stress testing of brokerage firms like Bear Stearns. And I think that that's...
And was that an addition from last year?
I believe that it was in the bill before. Is that correct? This bill preserves SEC discretion. Well, I know. Was it in the bill? He's asking.
The one that passed the House last session.
Last time. It was
okay.
Not. Okay.
Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you very much. Is there any other member that would seek time? Seeing none, I want to thank each of you for being here today. Please remember, and that our awesome stenographer would appreciate anything that you leave in writing for her completion of the record, and I thank you very much. I would like to add to the record a roll call, which was contained a very, very nice article on Mrs. Slaughter, including numbers of pictures of her in her performance of her duties. Without objection, I would like to enter that into the record. Does a gentleman from Massachusetts seek time?
I would like to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record a statement that was issued by Louise's office on her passing, and which lists her many accomplishments. And I'd also just like to announce that that her family will receive members of the community during calling hours on Wednesday, March 21st from 2 to 7, and Thursday, March 22nd from 4 to 8 at the Miller Funeral Home, which is in Rochester, New York, and that the funeral services celebrating Louise's life will be held Friday, March 23rd, beginning at 11 a.m. at the Kodak Hall at the Eastman Theater and also in Rochester. And then for members of Congress, there will be a plane that will be departing here to take members to the funeral. I think those arrangements will be made public, I think, in a very short while, but I just wanted to let you know that there will be transportation. And with that, I yield back.
Mr. McGovern, thank you very much. In fact, and I'm going to enter this into the record as part of the record also. You've got your copy. Okay. The newer members of Congress have not really witnessed or been a part of some of the life and times of the death of some of our members. I don't remember the last member. Judge, you remember the last member? But what I would say is that those of you who would choose would know that on Friday morning there would be transportation that would leave here. There will be a military escort and plane available, and I would anticipate that we would go from here to Rochester, attend the service. Transportation will be provided, and then ride back to Andrews Air Force Base in the afternoon on Friday, and would certainly invite any member that would choose to be a part of that. Okay, we now will move to the second part of this hearing, is there anyone else that would choose to give testimony on HR 4566? Seeing none, this now closes the hearing portion of HR 4566. We now open up the hearing, HR 5247, known as the Right to Try Act of 2018. We're delighted to have not only a gentleman from Virginia, also the gentleman from New Jersey, a gentleman from the Energy and Commerce Committee. Distinguished gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I am very glad that I was able to be here with you all today to hear all of your tributes for Congresswoman Slaughter. When I got the news, I started talking to people along the way in my district, and I said, you know, we lost a real nice lady. Didn't always agree with her, but she did politics the way it's supposed to be done. Civil, polite, but strong in her beliefs. And so I appreciated hearing all the comments that were made here today. On to business. The Right to Try bill is I think, an important bill. It is a measured response to a legitimate demand from the American public that if you are dying or you have a condition which is going to severely limit your life expectancy, and you are not asking the government to pay for it, but you want to be involved in some experiment or some new test out there or new program out there that may very well solve your problem, that even if the odds are slim, that you ought to have that right to try. The bill is measured in that unlike our colleagues on the other side of the Capitol, where they just basically opened it up, we say there are certain tests. If you look at the bill on pages 2 and 3, it goes through a series of things that have to be met before somebody can use right to try. And then again, instead of having an open-ended definition of who those people might be on page 5, it goes into the term eligible illness. And I think that's important because some people, I think, have mistook what the bill is trying to do. And it says in line 10 of the bill, a stage of a disease, eligible illness means a stage of a disease or condition in which there is a reasonable likelihood that death will occur within a matter of months, or a disease or condition that would result in significant, irreversible morbidity that is likely to lead to severely premature death. And so you go through that situation. And so I recognize that, you know, the FDA was created to try to protect folks from charlatans and quacks and goofy things. If you're in that situation and you have the means, or you've got a company that's willing to provide you with means, and you've gone through these tests, and the tests include that you are informed of all the dangers, that you do it. We heard testimony on the floor of the House last week from Congressman Barton of Texas that his brother had faced this. They got him the experimental treatment. They told him it will shorten your life if it doesn't work. If it does work, it may lengthen it. Well, he was one that shortened his life. But Congressman Barton told us that he didn't regret it, that his brother didn't regret it, the family didn't regret it, because they took their shot. And that's what this bill does. It gives people the opportunity, without the government saying no, to be able, in those limited situations that I discussed earlier, to take their shot. And we had hearings on this in front of the committee. I was particularly taken by the testimony of Lieutenant Commander Matthew Bellina. He's been here several times. He suffers from ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. He graduated from Virginia Tech and their Army Corps there, or their Corps of Cadets, excuse me. and went on to serve the United States before being diagnosed. Virginia Tech is in my district, so even though he didn't live in my district and does not live there now, he certainly had ties to the district. And he concluded his opening statement to the committee with these thoughts, and I tender these to you for your consideration. I know that it is probably too late for me, and I have made my peace with that. I need to know before I die that if my children find themselves in this unenviable position, that this nation that I proudly served will respect their liberties and their right to make their own decisions about their medical treatments. That's the bill, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Powerful. Sir, thank you. The gentleman from New Jersey, distinguished gentleman from the Energy and Commerce Committee, the ranking member, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. And I have a full statement, but I am going to try to summarize, if that's okay. So I'd ask that the full statement be included in the record.
Without objection, we'll include that in the record.
I respectfully disagree with my colleague. I don't believe that the legislation is a measured response. I think it's rather extreme, and I do think it's trying to get at a problem that really doesn't exist. We have, and I need to stress that the FDA has and provides a pathway that I think the gentleman, my colleague, actually describes. And I think that what this bill does is basically eliminate the FDA from that process. And the problem with that is it eliminates any kind of safeguards. In other words, the existing way that you could go about applying, or your physician would go about applying to be able to take this kind of experimental medication exists, but because the FDA approves it, there still are significant safeguards, and they would not exist once the FDA was out of the business. And I know my colleague says that, you know, we don't want charlatans, you know, providing medication, but I do think that that's what we're going to get. In other words, I don't think any legitimate company would run this risk without the FDA being involved. And so I think the only kind of experimental drugs you're going to be able to get are those that are actually being given out by bad actors. That's my concern. So that's kind of my summary, Mr. Chairman. But let me just say a few more things. I want to explain that there is actually a process with the FDA. It's if I could just describe it very quickly, it's called it's an expanded access, basically where the physician requests access to experimental drugs from a manufacturer. And in most cases, this application takes as little as 45 minutes to fill out. 99% of the requests submitted to the agency through that process are actually approved. In fact, of nearly 1,700 requests the FDA received last year for these type of experimental drugs when people are near death, only 9 were not approved out of 1,700. But the other thing about it is that what happens is, even though the FDA approves 99% of these treatments through what's called their expanded access process, it also adjusts the applications for 11% of those patients to improve patient safety protections. And that's what I'm afraid is going to be missing here. In other words, you apply, you have a very simple process, almost all the time you get approved, but in 11% of the cases, they make a change so that when you get this experimental drug, there's some safety precautions that are put into place that would not otherwise be in place if the FDA was not involved. A couple other things I want to mention, and then I want to mention the substitute, Mr. Chairman. I have a Democratic substitute, which we actually worked on a bipartisan basis, and then the Republicans pulled away and decided to go ahead with this bill. But there were 2 criticisms of the FDA that were basically made by the committee leaders, by the Republican leadership on the committee. One was that they didn't like the way the FDA dealt with adverse events associated with the experimental treatment. In other words, they felt that in certain cases, the FDA approved the experimental treatment, and there were adverse events, and they didn't like the way the FDA dealt with it. And the FDA has actually put out updated guidance with regard to those types of adverse events, which I think deal with that problem. And the other problem that has been mentioned is the liability. No, I'm sorry, the other problem that was mentioned is that the process where the physicians seek review often has to go before a commission. And the FDA put out a new proposal whereby only the chair of the commission or someone designated by them has to approve the drug. So you don't have to go through this commission process. So I think that I wanted to mention those two things that have actually been changed with the FDA since some of the criticism appeared. Now, just quickly, with regard to my Democratic substitute, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to stress that I would hope you'd put the substitute in order. It was actually the bill that we had negotiated with Energy and Commerce prior to the introduction of the current bill that you have before you. And then the GOP leadership decided to pull out of those negotiations. But the substitute addresses two key problems. One I mentioned was the guidance with regard to adverse events that occur in experimentation. Basically, we say that in our substitute that we would have a new process where there could be public input to see if new guidance is necessary for adverse events. And then the other one is the liability protection that basically provides liability protection to manufacturers, physicians, and hospitals if they're in compliance with the current law and the regulations for the expanded access program, then they have immunity from any kind of liability. Now, I mention this because I think that one of the things I said before, and I want to repeat, is that I don't think that any manufacturer will actually provide an experimental drug without the FDA being a part of the process. So that one of my main concerns about the legislation before you is that I don't think it's actually going to do anything because no reputable company will actually provide the drug. So what we're doing with this substitute is saying, look, if you do if you comply with the law and you actually go through the expanded access program, then you won't have any liability. And in that case, I think it's more likely that you will actually get companies to provide these experimental drugs if they think that they have the FDA approval and they know that they're not going to have liability if they provide it. The last thing I will say this is I noticed when we had the bill on the floor last week, there were members on both sides of the aisle that voted for it because they said that in their state, and there's 17 states like this now, they already have similar right to try legislation. But I would say, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, there is no evidence that in any of those states that have moved in this direction that anyone has actually gotten a drug through an experimental process that they didn't that didn't go through the FDA process that already exists. So really the state laws haven't done anything because everyone who's gotten these experimental drugs has actually gone through the FDA expanded access process that we have now, which again I said in 1,700 cases, all but 9 have actually been approved. So I disagree with my colleague. I really think that this is an extreme way of dealing with this issue that is kind of looking for a problem that doesn't exist because most people get approval. Thank you.
Chairman Yosebak's time, thank you very much. I have been involved for a number of years in this. It was called at the time that I knew it compassion care policy and advocated all the way to calling ambassadors. A guy named Tom Schieffer used to be ambassador to Japan. I spent a good bit of time with Mr. Ambassador Schaefer trying to get a Japanese company who was engaged in an experimental drug at that point, was going through the phases for the FDA approval, on behalf of several women who had breast cancer. And I did this with a California company. Perhaps Ms. Wittenberg, who came to give testimony to the committee, spoke about that. I tried my best. Talked to their lawyer, talked to the president of the company. I really went after them because of the fervency of a woman's life. I felt like it was important. I felt like the right to try was something that was important for this woman that was a lawyer out of Austin, Texas. And I spent a good bit of time because I felt like one did matter. I found that I had problems because there were too many questions about what might happen if it didn't work, what might happen to their reputation through the FDA, what might happen with their standing in community. And this was a woman who was willing to sign away all the rights for a chance that there was a trial going on a very specific gene-oriented cancer drug. I failed. I failed both times. That's 2 times. Maybe there were 9 last year or whatever period of time the gentleman from New Jersey.
But were you trying to get with the
Compassion
manufacturer?
Care policy. I went to these 2 companies. I remember them both. I remember how much time I took, how much the advice that I took from people was, it's not worth it. Don't worry about it. I didn't care. I racked up a lot of phone calls and my time, but it was an advocate for people's lives. I did this for a man who was one of the major contributors against me in Dallas, Texas. His family called and said, would you? I said, of course I would. And I helped him, and while it ultimately was perhaps too late, perhaps didn't work, I don't know. 3 times I've been involved in this in the number of years I've been a member of Congress, and I actually tried to get us to look at the Compassion Care policy. I think this is that answer several years later. But the right to try, where you had some bit of evidence behind you that you have a patient that exactly matches exactly the trial that is not in the trial, perhaps for any number of reasons. Look, somebody took the time to do this. I didn't. I burned up myself in frustration. You know what? It mattered to me and it mattered to those people, and I appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
For this, I am trying to read this. I note you also, you can't be held liable if you don't agree to it. It's my hope we make this work, because the ability that parents have or family members have to advocate on behalf of somebody, it just is enormous. And I can see where there's going to be a rush and a lot of experimental things that might not be available, and I can see where things might, your judgment might be, hold on, don't do that yet, maybe wait, but there will be a process, and I think process beats no. I think no is a hard thing where things don't exist. So I hope this is a chance, a chance to try. So I thank you. Gentleman from Georgia. Gentleman does not seek time. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Yeah, I have no questions other than I hope that we'll make the substitute in order. Mr. Pullen, did you want to?
Well, I just didn't, it's a tough issue, and I'm almost hesitating to say anything about what the chairman said, but I guess what I want to stress is that I just don't see a manufacturer. It seemed to me in that case that the manufacturer was unwilling to provide the drug. And I honestly believe that this legislation isn't going to solve that situation, because the manufacturer is still not going to provide the drug. There's nothing in the bill that says that that company has to provide the drug. And if they don't have the FDA process where they can say, I'm going to go through this process and I'm not going to have any liability, they're not going to offer the drug. So I think it's kind of a false hope. As if the FDA can't force the manufacturer to provide the drug, and I don't think they will if they don't go through the FDA process. So that's my only point, Mr. Chairman.
Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I would just say that one of the criteria in the bill is that to be an eligible investigational drug, it has to have already have a phase 1 clinical trial completed. So a lot of these companies will be looking for people who may not be exactly in their clinical trial for whatever reason, but who may fit the mold, and this gives them needed data back. So I do think there will be some companies, and in fairness, if it doesn't do what we want it to do, then a future Congress will take that issue up as well. But right now, they can't get there, and so I think the bill allows us to go a step further in the right to try, what I believe is a measured step. I know my good friend and colleague disagrees, but I believe it's a measured step, unlike what I believe the Senate passed. I believe it was unanimous, but it was pretty close if it wasn't, where they just opened it wide up, and I understand why the Senate did that. There's a huge public opinion push for this because people don't understand why the government is getting in the way when you have months left to live and you're willing to spend the money and throw the Hail Mary pass.
Is a gentleman would yield, though. See, the problem with phase one is that phase one clinical trials often are very limited. They may only have maybe 20 participants. Right. And the emphasis in phase one is strictly on whether or not, pretty much whether this is toxic, right? In other words, it doesn't guarantee you that it's effective. It doesn't look to see what kind of side effects there would be. And I understand there's the notion out there that, you're taking your own responsibility and you're at the end of life and you can try anything. But, the bottom line is a lot of times the adverse effects, as you mentioned in one case, actually mean that you live less time. And we've already we're getting criticism from the FDA because they've approved drugs that have had adverse impact. So I just don't think that this legislation is going to make a difference. I really don't.
Okay, you're back.
Thank you very much. I don't want to keep this going. I feel strongly about this, but the facts of the case are they won't get a placebo. They'll get the real thing. And when you're in a trial, you don't know if you're getting the real thing or a placebo. And I would want that right for my son, in this case, could be a son or a daughter, or a wife, that zeroed in on exactly what it was and not to guess whether they're getting a placebo. And this allows a company a chance to say, there's a process, we're going to be benevolent. I begged people. I begged people before. I begged them for the real thing. Dr. Burgess?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate this discussion, and I'll have plenty of time to talk about it tomorrow on the floor. I would just point out back in 2008, there was a very famous case down in Dallas, Texas, where a gentleman, a lawyer who was a large Democratic donor, had an illness that was perhaps amenable to being treated by a drug that was not generally available. And the then Speaker of the House interceded on his behalf. Nancy Pelosi got him the drug. Unfortunately, it was too little too late, and it did not really affect positively the outcome. But this individual's wife said it's not fair to other people because other people can't pick up the phone and make the government give them a drug. And that was reported in the Dallas Morning News in October of 2008. I have a number of articles referencing this very incident, and I will make them available for the record, Mr. Chairman.
And that is the same instance where I told you they came to me, and I was seen as a person that did, he opposed my political election, and I willingly tried to help. I think life is a different matter. We were here talking about it today, about how important it is, and Fred deserved the right to get that.
The right to try, yes, sir.
Vigorously,
I yield back.
Vigorously attempted to help him and supported Mrs. Pelosi when she did the same. Judge?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. When the matter was on the floor last week, I thought back and had great sympathies for the feelings that I expressed, because all of us have either experienced or know people that are in that situation, and we would want for any hope that an individual sought to be provided to them. And I had mixed emotions about it. Largely, I thought about the comedian Red Skelton, who had a child, and he went all over the world seeking a cure. And fortunately for Red Skelton, he had the ability to do that. And there are others that go all around the world seeking matters. Mr. Griffith, the times that you've been up here, I've gained immense respect for your thoughtfulness with reference to legislation. I forget the previous time I said something similar because of your thoughtfulness. The real problem that I have with this is a process problem, and that is the fact that it came on the floor suddenly. It has not gone through regular order, and this is the kind of bill that it would seem to me that it would help if experts were to weigh in. So my question to you is, what's the rush? You know, aside from the fact that one person, certainly out there, you and I would want that person to be saved if we knew there was something we could do. But in light of some of the opposition, for example, 4 former commissioners of FDA are opposed, and I'm going to introduce in the record several organizations. None of them are makeshift, play kind. I mean, these are very serious organizations that are opposed, that if we were to have hearings, they would have an opportunity to come before you and Mr. Pallone or your colleagues on the committee. So how do you feel about that, the fact that it's just coming out here rather than having gone through regular order?
Well, as you may recall, I'm a big believer in trying to do things through regular order. Now, I will tell you that we had hearings on this in the committee. I will tell you that on this language, I'm advised that FDA gave some technical advice. Of course, they can't lobby, so they can't take a position on the bill itself. I will tell you that various groups that oppose it, may not like, and I don't know exactly, but may not like right to try in concept. I happen to like that in concept, and in fairness, I might go a little bit further than this bill goes, which is why I consider it very measured, because I know I'd probably go a step further, not as far as the Senate, but a step further personally. But I do think it's a good way to get out there and test the waters. And sometimes one of our problems in D.C. for various procedural reasons, and I've discussed those with the chairman and some others, but we take so long to get things done that people think that, going through that process just slows down everything. And here we have a bill. We know that this bill had sufficient votes to pass if it were done as a rule bill as opposed to a suspension. And I think it does a lot of good. So whatever warts it may have in the process of getting here, we have a bill that I think is very measured, that's a good bill, and that has the support of more than half of the members of the United States House of Representatives.
Mr. Pallone?
Well, I mean, I really think that the reason that it didn't go through any kind of hearing or markup in committee or subcommittee is because of the opposition. In other words, we have 103 now patient organizations, many of them involved in cancer research, that have written in opposition to the bill. I think that's part of my testimony, Mr. Chairman. I was trying to summarize, but it's in my testimony. And we also have the 4 previous FDA commissioners who opposed it and said, and I quote, "There's no evidence that the bill would meaningfully improve access for patients and would remove the FDA from the process and create a dangerous precedent that would erode protections for vulnerable patients." You understand, we were working and negotiating a way of improving the current process, this expanded access under the FDA, and I thought we were coming close to a consensus. The difference between that bipartisan initiative that would have gone through regular order and this is that this removes the FDA from the process, and that's the problem. That's why so many manufacturers, pharma, and these patient groups oppose it, because they're very afraid that without the FDA process, which has been in existence for a while, for a long time, and as I said, most 99% approval, that without that you have no guarantee of safety. And I still think that people, when they take a drug, they still assume that somehow the FDA or the government has said, okay, this is all right, even if it's experimental. And that would be gone with this bill.
You know, Frank, I'm not so certain about that. GNC is running a sale of 50% off of everything you buy. And people buy all of that supplemental stuff thinking that it's going to do something, and FDA hadn't approved a lot of that stuff. I just point that out to you. But just to button this up, I would like, Mr. Chairman, unanimous consent to include in the record some of the organizations, and I shan't go into even enumerating them, but it's a lot of them. And they wrote to Speaker Ryan and Minority Leader Pelosi opposing this measure. I ask unanimous consent for the Cancer Leadership Council's opposition to be included. And an interesting part of the Isaac Foundation, Andrew McFadden, record in opposition, and Mr. Pallone and I have mentioned the former FDA commissioners who say the right to try bills could endanger vulnerable patients. And with your permission, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, we'll enter those record, Judge. Thank you.
And I yield back my time.
Yes, sir.
Will the gentleman yield?
Of course I will.
I do feel obligated to point out that the subcommittee did have a hearing on this bill. It was pretty well attended. The FDA commissioner himself was there. Dr. Gottlieb was there. The two principal authors of the bill presented their case, and we had a number of patient groups who testified, a number of stakeholders who testified. So this bill did go through a hearing process in the Subcommittee on Health and the Energy and Commerce Committee.
When, Dr. Burgess?
But Chairman Burgess, it was the Senate bill, not this one. It was the Senate
No,
bill.
it was the, reclaiming my time, it was the bill offered by Mr. Biggs and Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Well, it wasn't this bill in any case. I mean, I first got a copy of this bill last week, the day before it went to the floor on suspension. That was the first time I saw it.
Well, Dr. Burgess, you and I will wrangle it out on tomorrow. We'll, by that time, have the substance as to whether or not there was a hearing. But in any event, it's an interesting process that we're undertaking. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. Gentleman from Colorado.
Yeah, thank you. And from my perspective, this bill doesn't go nearly far enough to give people the ability to try life-saving drugs at their own cost and their own risk. I would like to ask the chair why we aren't just considering the Senate bill, which I understand goes further and would also have bipartisan support, and 100 senators supported it, or 99, however many there are these days.
I'd be happy to
Sure,
answer
yeah.
that. I have to tell you, the Senate bill goes so far that I would have to oppose it, and I'm pretty avant-garde on these type of issues, because what it says is it also includes chronic conditions, and I think the Senate bill sets us up for a situation where we actually lose right to try and wouldn't be able to discuss it again for 50 years, because what would happen is somebody who has a 40-year life expectancy would then be allowed to try an experimental drug without even these criteria that are spelled out on pages 2 and 3, and then what happens is you have 1 or 2 cases where that 40-year life expectancy is then shortened to just a few months, and the uproar would be, oh my gosh, this is crazy, and I think appropriately, that would be the uproar, and then nobody would want to try anything to do with the right to try again probably for another, I would think 50 years, maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's only 25.
Well, I understand, like, why if somebody has a 30 or 40-year chronic illness, why should the government insert themselves in this private transaction that they can have with their own money? I mean, everybody in the Senate agreed, I agree too. Why do you want to insert big government in the middle of somebody's private decision?
And while I have leanings in that direction, I also agree with my colleague that may be going too far in taking those safeguards out, because people would then feel they weren't necessarily looking at it from throwing the Hail Mary pass, as I've said several times. They wouldn't look at it as, okay, wait a minute, I've got just a few months, let's see what the experiment is. Yeah. They've got 40 years. Now they may, as you correctly point out, they may be in pain, and maybe that pain drives them to think they should try that. But I do think that is the role of the FDA.
Well, also, if you're 20 years old and you have something with a 20-year, 30, it'll kill you in 20 years, still that's pretty darn young. If you're 20 and it'll kill you when you're 40, I mean, that might be called chronic, but I'd call that something you ought to be able to, try something new for.
And while I would hope that the FDA would work towards making some things available like that, in that case, there's also the belief, at least that I have, that science is marching forward, and that while right now they may have, only 20 more years, so from 20 to 40, which is still pretty young, but in 10 years, an actual cure might come up, and we've denied them that because we let them take something early on that we had no assurance of whatsoever under the Senate bill. And that's why I think this bill is.
Well, I think we don't we generally have safety demonstrated, just not efficacy at that point, that they're allowed to try it, some degree of safety?
I think that my learned colleague who's in opposition to the bill, but who I agree with on this, that phase 1 just says it's not toxic. Oftentimes, because you have a disease that doesn't have a whole lot of people, in that phase 1, you may have only had 20 or 30 folks involved, but that's because there may only be, 1,000 nationally who are suffering from that condition.
Well,
so
and I would just say, I mean, we should, I think the Senate bill, as I said, I supported your bill on suspension. I'll certainly support it, but I'd like to see you go a lot further. Now, what about Mr. Pallone's idea that he had one good idea he mentioned about why not this indemnification piece? I mean, usually Republicans are thrilled to get lawyers out of it and not allow these lawsuits, and it's Democrats who hesitate. Why aren't you taking his idea and saying we'll build this indemnification in so the drug company isn't on the hook if it doesn't work?
I'm not sure I follow that, because what we say is that they're not on the hook unless there's a willful or criminal misconduct, a reckless misconduct, or gross negligence. So we take out.
So you do have that.
We do have that.
Okay,
You take out mere negligence, but you don't take out willful, criminal, reckless, or gross negligence.
And what was the one, Mr. Pallone, that you wanted to put back in the Democratic substitute, an additional protection, I think you said, for legal suits?
Yeah, let me clarify, because I don't want to be confusing. He has that language. The current law, of course, doesn't have that language. So in other words, what we're saying is we're getting criticism for the existing FDA process because it doesn't address liability. Okay. And therefore, a lot, if I'm saying that if you don't address liability, then it's very possible that a lot of these manufacturers, particularly the ones that are not charlatans, are going to even offer the drug.
So I mean, reclaiming my time, and I'm just a layperson here and trying to understand this. So you're saying you actually think his indemnification language is okay, but you think that we can use that with the current process and that'll solve the problem better than the rest of what is in the bill? Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that I really don't think the bill is going to accomplish anything, because I think that the reason why so many of the pharmaceuticals oppose it is because they won't offer this drug. He doesn't force anybody to offer the drug.
Sure.
So if they don't have a process with the FDA where the FDA says, okay, you can take this, and maybe go even further, as I'm suggesting in the substitute, to say you don't have any liability if you follow the FDA process, I'm not sure that these drugs are even going to be available.
Well, we have votes soon, so we'll go back. But I would just encourage the gentleman to go further. Other ideas include bifurcating the safety and efficacy process, allowing drugs to be sold after demonstration of safety prior to demonstration of efficacy. Another suggestion is reciprocal agreements with Europe and other countries, so drugs that are approved there are approved here. It costs over a friggin' $1 billion to bring a drug through approval. That's one of the reasons Americans pay more than in any other country. So, I mean, this is just absurd. We just do this wrong. So I'm going to support your bill, but I hope you can go back to the drawing board and know you will have bipartisan support as far as you want to go, not just me, many Democrats. Go further, please, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. I understand the detail that you're going down. It's most interesting as I hear the committee, maybe some of our members for the first time engaging in this argument, which is the judge's point about having a hearing. This is a most interesting topic. The fear is that it's not going to work and somebody's going to come and say, that didn't work. And it hurts a company. It hurts an IPO. It hurts whatever they're doing. All we're talking about is a right to try. I mean, it's just a guess for a life, and this is a tough issue. And I agree with the judge. Boy, I wish we all dug into this. Any other member seeks time? Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks for bringing these issues and ideas to the committee. It reinforces us, I think, about how important the job that each of you have, and the gentleman from Louisville, Texas, who serves as the young chairman of the subcommittee on health, as he approaches those with the medical degree and the experience and knowledge that he has from at least 20 years, 30 years of experience as a practicing physician. This is the kind of argument that I think is substance that is worthy of this body and worthy of this committee. And I want to thank you both for being here
Thank you very much. If you please remember, anything you brought in writing would be for us, the stenographer, as she completes her task. Is there any other member that would seek to be heard? Gentleman from Colorado.
Mr. Chairman, I have a letter to the record to submit from Nicole and Mike Simbura in my district, sharing their story about Mike's diagnosis with ALS and his participation in a trial, the lack of treatments for ALS, and the strong support of both Nicole and Mike for this bill, and I'd like to submit that to the record.
Objection. Is there any other member that would seek to be heard on H.R. 5247? Seeing none, let's now close the hearing portion of H.R. 5247, and this completes the testimony. Chair will now be in receipt of a motion from the distinguished gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 4566, the Alleviating Stress Test Burdens to Help Investors Act, a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Financial Services. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 115-65 shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule makes in order only the further amendment printed in the Rules Committee report, if offered by the member designated in the report, which shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendment printed in the report. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instruction. Section 2 of the rule provides for consideration of H.R. 5247, the Trickett, Wendler, Frank, Mangiello, Jordan McLean, and Matthew Bellina Right to Try Act of 2018 under a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill. The rule provides one motion to recommit. Section 3 of the rule waives the requirement of Clause 6A of Rule 13 for a 2/3 vote to consider a report from the Committee on Rules on the same day as presented to the House with respect to any resolution reported through the legislative day of March 23, 2018. Section 4 of the rule provides that it shall be in order at any time on the legislative day of March 22, 2018, or March 23, 2018, for the Speaker to entertain motions that the House suspend the rules as though under Clause 1 of Rule 15, and that the Speaker or his designee shall consult with the minority leader or her designee on the designation of any matter for consideration pursuant to this section. Finally, Section 5 of the rule provides that Section 3A of House Resolution 5 is amended by striking the first session of.
Thank you very much. You've now heard the motion from the distinguished gentleman from Georgia. I'll yield myself 2 seconds, and that is to say this is one rule, 2 bills. Is there amendment or discussion to that process? Seeing none, vote now be on the motion from the distinguished gentleman from Georgia. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Accordingly, the gentleman from Louisville, Texas, Dr. Michael Burgess, will be handling this for Republicans.
And the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Hastings.
And Judge Hastings will be handling this for Democrats. The gentleman from Georgia, from Florida may have a question. The answer is we expect additional meetings on legislation related to government funding to come to this committee. As soon as it does that, we will notify the distinguished gentleman, the staff director on both sides that it's been filed. So I do expect something. We don't know when yet. Thank you very much. I want to thank the committee for its appreciation, respect of the gentlewoman from Rochester, New York, who will be missed, and we want to thank her for her service. This now completes our work for the day.